So a verse from Matthew 8:20. A man said to Jesus, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Lord, have mercy on those without shelter. Guide them to safety, comfort their suffering, and inspire us to act with compassion and justice to help them find a home. Amen. So I have great pleasure in inviting Zilla to speak to us and tell us a little bit about Friends, Families and Travellers and a little bit about herself, and then she'll give a presentation. Thank you, Zilla.
Thank you so much, Nikki. And yes, that was a very, very apt verse. Thank you for that. So my name's Zilla Holford. As has just been said, I'm a policy and research officer at Friends, Families and Travellers. We are a charity who works for Gypsies, Roma and Travellers rights, and we work particularly on anti-racism, anti-discrimination work, focusing on accommodation issues, health, as well as hate. And we, excuse me, so yeah, FFT, we have, as has been said, I work in the policy team. We also have a service delivery team who does a lot of casework and outreach. They run a national helpline for people across the UK. So we support a lot of people in a number of different ways, as well as trying to raise awareness about issues that affect the rights of Gypsies and Travellers in particular, and upholding their human rights. So we also provide the Secretariat, so we support the running of the all-party parliamentary group of MPs and members of the House of Lords who focus on issues that affect Gypsy, Roma and Travellers to promote their rights. So that's probably enough about me. Today I'm here to talk to you about transit sites and transit provision for Gypsies and Travellers in the UK. I'm hoping that I will be able to share my presentation with you all without difficulty, so I will just try and do that now. Sorry, give me a second. I think Paul has a copy of it as well, and you should do. Okay. If I sorry everybody, but I'm here to talk about the provision of transit sites, so places for, well, supposedly places for Gypsies and Travellers to be able to stop, and you know, places for them to stay. And I'll talk firstly a little bit about the background of that and issues affecting Gypsies and Travellers in terms of their access to accommodation and having a good, safe, decent place to stop and to stay. And then I'll talk a little bit about, go through the findings of a research project, which I did last year, which we published just in November, which was looking at the provision by local authorities across the country. Okay, right, one sec. Okay, now can everybody see this? I'm so sorry, it's just that it's underneath. Okay. All right. Why is it doing this? do apologise, everyone. There we go. Okay. Can everybody see this? Can we have a thumbs up? Thank you. Thanks, Nikki. Okay, so first talk a little bit about the background. So as some of you, I'm sure, are very well aware, traveling and living nomadically are really important aspects of life, cultural heritage, and the identities. It's a traditional part of life for a lot of Gypsy and traveller people. Of the people in the UK at the moment, Gypsies and travellers, around about a quarter of those people are living in a caravan or another kind of mobile structure. And while the majority of people from these communities might now live in settled accommodation, what's known as bricks and mortar, a lot of people still keep the travelling tradition for part of the year. That might be for, you know, events, cultural, social reasons that people might have been needing to travel for work. And, you know, there might be, you know, there are certain times of the year, certain things, you know, funerals, for example, weddings, other occasions where people want to get together to be around family, community. Historically, there has been a lot of hostility, prejudice, discrimination, and hatred towards Gypsies and travellers, you know, for centuries, as I'm sure I don't need to tell a lot of you. Over time, certain rights have been eroded, essentially, and so I'll just take you through a little bit of the background of that. So going back over the past few decades, in the early 1960s, came what was known as the closure of the commons. So this was essentially legislation to make it more difficult in terms of people staying in caravans, and essentially kind of closing a lot of traditional stopping places where previously people would have stopped, and they might have stayed on what was common land, essentially. In 1968, the law was changed to recognise that specific sites, that spaces were still needed for people, for Gypsies and travellers, and a statutory duty was introduced to provide, to say that local authorities needed to provide spaces on which they could stay. Over the sort of next few decades, there were further changes to the law, which sort of rolls further back on where people essentially are able to stop and stay. In 1994, there was a piece of legislation, Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. Now that ended the statutory duty for local authorities, which had been created in the late 60s, ended their duty to have to provide Gypsy and traveller sites, essentially. Local authorities, county councils still had the power to provide that, but they weren't mandated to do that by law. And essentially that has meant that there has been quite a significant decline in the amount of spaces and the types of spaces where people are able to stop if they need to, and to live, especially roadside. So in the 2020s, there was a piece of legislation in 2022 that was passed by the previous government, which provided police powers to essentially move people onto what were called authorised sites, but there's quite a significant increase in police power to essentially have a really enforcement approach to what's known as unauthorized encampments. So basically people who are living on the roadside, living nomadically. And essentially it's kind of has become a sort of almost criminalizing people further and further, almost sort of are out of existence, arguably, because the powers that the police have in these situations allow them to, in certain cases, seize people's vehicles, so seizing people's homes, based on whether they're perceived to cause, for example, annoyance, the threshold for why people might locally contact police and ask them, because of discriminatory attitudes, essentially, a lot of the time because of, racism or people not understanding the communities. The police have quite disproportionate powers to target gypsies and travellers in this way. So, okay, move on. It's just a sort of example of the type of sign, which I'm sure isn't unfamiliar actually to many people. Let me just. Has that changed anything for anybody else? No.
It's clear.
Thank you. What I've done there is just given myself a bit more space on the screen to see my own notes. So given that we know that there is a significant shortage of sites, police in the circumstances where police are called or police turn up to try and move people on, they are supposed to direct people to what's known as an authorized site. So that's a site that's specifically designated as a gypsy and traveller site. But the number of sites actually available has been steadily decreasing over the past few years. So there was research in 2023 that found over 2/3 of England's local planning authorities had completely failed to include traveller sites in their development plans, even though there was nearly 30 years of government policy and guidance that required them to. There were 119 socially rented sites, so local authority provided sites, which were built between 1960 and 1994, 119 socially rented sites built. Since 1994, there have been 30 that have been built. So that gives a sense of the kind of steady decline of the amount, in terms of the so-called authorized spaces where people can stop. Now, FFT, through our casework, we hear a lot from service users and people in communities about the lack of decent places to stop. So in 2023, we initiated a piece of research basically to try and get a better understanding of the provision of transit sites and what options are available to people. So in terms of, just to get some definitions for what this was looking at, when we say transit site, that is a site which is specifically designated for people to stay for a specified period of time, typically up to 3 months. So people staying on a transit site would have a license agreement to station a caravan for a specified amount of time. People on transit sites are covered legally by the terms of the Mobile Homes Act, but they do have more limited rights and less security of tenure than they might if they were staying on a permanent site. And I mentioned earlier the police powers to direct people to leave a piece of land, which is supposed to be on the condition, well, it does say in the law, if the local authority can provide a suitable pitch for the caravans elsewhere within the area, which we'll come to that more later, but that can be the key issue, really. So a transit pitch, just to be really nitpicky about terminology, a transit pitch is a specific pitch where someone is entitled to station a caravan under the terms of a site agreement, again for a fixed period, usually up to 3 months. Now, some transit pitches might be stationed on what are otherwise permanent sites, so sites where people have there'll be a certain number of pitches. Some of those are for permanent residents, and some of them will be reserved for as transit pitches, rather than the whole site being a transit site. And lastly, negotiated stopping, which we'll talk a bit more about later. That refers to a mutual agreement that's made between people who are stopping in an area and the local authority. So in those cases, a decision is made between both parties about where they can stay, how long they can stay on the roadside or on a piece of land without the threat of eviction. So that includes making mutual agreements about things like waste disposal, kind of basic temporary facilities, access to water and those other kinds of basics. So for this piece of research, basically to get a proper assessment of the current picture of transit provision across the UK, we sent a Freedom of Information request to every single local authority, so that's district councils, county councils, all the various different types that we have, turns out a lot. So we sent Freedom of Information requests to all UK local authorities, asking a range of questions about different aspects of transit provision. So that included questions about how many transit pitches and or how many transit sites there were within an authority's local area, how long people are permitted to stay, whether there were any minimum no return periods following a stay that sort of mean you can't come back for a certain amount of time after you've stayed somewhere. The costs of securing and also of renting a pitch, different kind of utility charges, what amenities and facilities you get, and what sort of services are available to site residents. So I sent requests to all local authorities. I received responses from them 362. So that was, I think it was 95% of all local authorities that we received responses from. And the research said, so only 31 local authorities across the UK told us that they had transit provision at all within their area. Obviously, quite shockingly low. So 332, well over 90% responded, indicating that they had no local authority owned or managed transit sites or pitches. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is nowhere in that particular area that people could stop. There are private sites, but this piece of research was looking specifically at what local authorities have available in terms of, the powers that they have to provide transit provision, place for people to stay. So of the 92% who responded saying that they had no transit provision, 54 of those authorities said in their response that not only did they have no information about the transit provision in their own authorities, but they also advised us to contact a different local government authority for that information. So in some cases, in those cases, we would have a response from X county council saying, this isn't our responsibility, and this responsibility lies with so-and-so district council within that kind of council area. But we also had the exact same kind of opposite response from the local council. So in some cases, they were kind of both just pointing at each other like this. Now, 7 of the councils we heard from, they provided information saying that they had other arrangements for Gypsies and Travellers to stay, such as negotiated stopping arrangements, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail later. Now, one of the kind of big themes, if you like, that came out of this research was a real lack of clarity and consistency between different areas around their approach and their policies on transit provision for Gypsies and Travellers, which just kind of raised more questions about how accessible the information for anybody wanting to travel to an area might be, especially if you were in immediate need of a transit pitch. In some cases, it was really difficult to find, the contact details, the information about where the site was, yeah, just a real lack of clarity, kind of, so much so that it became one of the main themes of the research, I suppose. So one of the other things that we asked about was time limits in terms of stays, because we're looking for a kind of any amount of consistency, really, which also was a bit of a theme in the lack of it. So 74% of councils which had transit provision, so talking now about of those 31 authorities who replied to us to say they had some, 74% had a maximum period for which people could stay on a pitch or a site. So that ranged between 2 weeks and 180 days, although in most cases it was 90 days. 58% said that they had a minimum no return period following a stay on a transit site or pitch, and those ranged from a month to a year between different authorities. So again, really difficult to get a sense of, like, go to one area and then essentially be kind of blocked from going back to it after you have left because of the fact that you have been there that recently. And 39% of the authorities with transit provision told us that the police had used Section 62 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act to direct people to the site. So those police powers I was talking about earlier, just under 40% said that they had used, police had used those powers in that area. One of the other things we looked at was the different costs of securing and staying on a transit pitch, which really varies between authority areas. Around half of transits, so half of them were charging a deposit to secure a pitch, as well as the pitch fees, so as well as the kind of the rent that you're paying. So where these were charged, deposit amounts were ranging anything between £100 to £500. Some authorities on sites that was charged per caravan, some authorities it was charged per caravan, per pitch. So those costs can really add up. And again, half of authorities with transit provision said that the people staying on those sites are then also charged extra fees for the use of utilities. And arrangements for that can really vary across different sites and different areas. Some areas, local authorities will charge people for just an electricity hookup, some for electricity and mains gas, others electricity and water, others utilities, but no electricity. So loads of different, arrangements essentially. And as well, some people here may well know, but fuel poverty is a really significant issue for a lot of people who live in a caravan or a mobile home. and that's compounded by a recent extreme rise in energy costs since 2022 in particular. So depending on the arrangement at an individual site and the utilities that are available, an extra charge, people using transit provision can face quite a number of hidden costs, especially if there isn't anywhere else nearby that they're appropriately allowed to access because of the sort of increased legislation saying that essentially you can't stay places. So I've mentioned negotiated stopping a couple of times, which is obviously the kind of main focus today. So I just want to end looking really at some good practice examples which came back in the research that we did. So there were a few councils who gave us a sort of neither a yes or no response because we had asked very specifically about transit sites and transit pitches. So a small number said that although they didn't have transit pitches or sites per se, they either had that in development or that their area's operation had a negotiated stopping arrangements in place. So those were Durham, Rochdale, Wolverhampton, Anglesey, and the Highland Council. So Durham County Council, as some of you will know, Appleby Horse Fair takes place there every year. So they operate areas called temporary stopover areas where people can stay between April and September, and also sort of providing more spaces around Appleby Horse Fair, sort of 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after. Anglesey said that they have, they know that they have a few families who visit each summer, and so they kind of make arrangements in advance in terms of what people will need. Sorry. There we go. Sorry about that. So thinking about the benefits of negotiated stopping and what that sort of looks like, whether you live in a house or you live on site or on the road, as I think I sort of mentioned quite close to the beginning, but for a lot of people, continuing that traveling tradition, certainly at some points of the year, even if you live even if you're settled, that is really an important, vital part of your life and your identity. So having a better understanding, I think, about the negotiated stopping approach ultimately can help to sort of improve the experience for gypsies and travellers who are, on the road, or when people are travelling, giving them somewhere decent to stop. But it also means that using an engagement approach rather than an enforcement approach, it's a more positive way of engaging with people anyway. Using engagement means that you're kind of more likely to get a positive response from people in terms of the local community and people who are traveling to a place or through a place. There was research a few years back which showed that Leeds City Council, who use negotiated stopping, I think it's an approach that was first developed by Gate Hearts and Leeds City Council, and they say that it saved them over £230,000 on cleanup and enforcement costs. So it's an approach that's mutually beneficial. Essentially, what it involves is all parties coming to a common agreement for gypsies and travellers to use an unused piece of land as a temporary stopping place. And then terms are agreed between the local authority, people who are coming there. Things like what land to be used, what services the council will provide, and this is supposed to, this could include water, rubbish disposal, sanitation, and agreeing how long you would be staying in a place. Usually negotiated stopping agreements work for around 28 days, but it can vary because the whole point is that it's kind of on a case-by-case basis for what people need. So thinking about this in terms of sanctuary stopping and what you might be able to do, what churches might be able to do in terms of hello, do I need to stop? No?
Hello?
Okay, sorry, I thought I was getting a time warning.
Well, we did start late, but
okay, grand.
You're on your last slide, are you now, Zilla, anyway?
I am, yes. Yeah. So thinking about what you can do to think about the sanctuary stopping approach, which is essentially a negotiated stopping approach, but talking about specifically how churches can be involved. So communication, mutual respect, and community are obviously really important. Everybody needs that. Practical things you can do include displaying the Gypsy, Roma, Traveller Friendly Churches logo. If people are traveling in your area, go out, visit, speak to people, go out and greet a new camp, and consider offering sanctuary essentially to people. So land that's owned and managed by the parochial church council on behalf of a church can be considered. It involves needing to liaise with your local authority about negotiated stopping. It might be a number of local authorities have Gypsy and Traveller liaison officers who in many cases would be the right person to kind of approach about that. But if a parochial church council is not sure about the ownership or control of a piece of church land and whether that will be suitable, the diocese might be able to provide information on that. So you can make initial inquiries to your relevant archdeacon as a sort of starting point. And just to do extra plug, as always, for Gypsy, Roma, Traveller Friendly Churches, you can keep an eye on their website for more information about sanctuary stopping, and thinking about different ways that your churches can reach out to Gypsies and travellers, and really providing what is a much needed safe, decent place to stop, so that people can live their lives, which they have a right to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's me done.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Zilla. We could take a few questions now, or people might want to wait to the end and have discussion with everybody. So anything, I've noticed a few things come up in the chat. No direct questions so far.
There was just a question from Aberline, really, or more of an observation about Wolverhampton City Council and their response. So I have provided the summary report in the chat for anyone that needs that, and if you want the full report you can go on to Friends, Families and Travellers. So I don't know, Zilla, if you wanted to kind of refer to Aberline about the Wolverhampton City Council.
Aberline's
and there's a couple of hands up too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Aberline, David and Sam have their hands up.
Yeah, I'm interested when you said about the various different fee arrangements, and I can understand how that may be difficult to work out, because you think you go into a site and then you might discover that there's additional fees and everything else on there. However, given the fact that it's not always the same in every council, and they're probably never going to do it. I wondered if you could comment on how people react to the idea of having utilities charged separately. Some people might say that it's continually trying to add an extra payment that is required from me. Other people might look at it the other way round and say it's offering me the opportunity not to have to pay for a utility that I don't actually need to use. If I choose to do my cooking outside and whatever, not use the gas and the electricity, whatever it is, then I'm actually saving money. I just wondered if you could comment on how those people using this provision actually see what would be their ideal, what would they prefer to be.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really interesting question. So I mean, this piece of research that I did, and I didn't go into all the sort of specifics of kind of conclusions and recommendations just because of the time constraint today, but one of the conclusions that we made here was that essentially what we need is this piece of research was quite narrowly focused. So essentially the information that we got was what those local authorities told us. And what we were saying was what this needs next, essentially, which is the kind of next phase of this research, which colleagues of mine are now focusing on over the coming months and kind of working on producing at the moment, co-producing with members of people from the communities themselves, because that is key, really. That's what we need, is to hear from people, which is what this next phase of the research is doing exactly that. So speaking directly to people about, well, what do people actually want and need from, in terms of their accommodation, what do they need from a transit site, what do they actually want, as opposed to sort of imposing that by saying, oh, we think you need this kind of space, when that hasn't necessarily come from the people who will be using the space themselves. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
It does. Thank you very much. And I do apologise to everybody. I'm not deliberately trying to make out that I'm blind. I'm just sitting in the sunlight and my lenses do it. I've just realised I'm hiding my eyes from everyone. Sorry.
So we had Sam Worrell who wanted a question, and then we have Abelan McShane, unless your question's already been answered. So Sam?
Yeah, so I could probably actually add to what Zilla's said as well, because I'm working on that next stage of the transit project that's come out of the research project that she was working on. And it kind of links into what I was going to say anyway, is that, so we're doing individual interviews with community members, and I've done about 20 myself at the moment, and we've got quite a lot more that have come in. We're kind of pushing about 100 individual interviews, and yeah, what people are saying is, we're asking about cost, we're asking about the sort of facilities that they want, we're asking about what their ideal transit site would look like, and it doesn't seem that actually people want that much. So I think the real thing, the stopping point with the local authorities is, like, if you say to, well, you know, you need to provide a transit site, they seem to have this thing in their head where they think, oh God, we've got to build this site, we've got to put these facilities on and these pitches and utility blocks and blah, 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 all this stuff. And what's coming out of the initial research is that actually people just want a place where they feel safe, where they can stay for a few days just to rest, do some repairs. And the two important things that are coming up that people are really struggling with is water and where to recycle and do their rubbish. You know, people are carrying stuff around with them for days and days and days because there's no recycling facilities in supermarket car parks anymore. They've all been taken away. People are trying to, you know, they're begging water off friends and, you know, family, or they're going out of their way to get water. So, you know, a basic human right, but people are not getting it. And then actually they don't want an all singing, all dancing, expensive transit site. They just want something quite basic. Yeah. So I think, you know, this is the part of the research that is building on the project that Zilla's been doing. And I think the messages that will come out are that people actually don't want that much.
Yeah.
Thank you,
yeah,
Sam.
absolutely. Yeah. And
Abeline?
Sorry. Yes.
Abeline?
Sorry, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you, Sam. But remember, Sam, there's also people with health issues that need to stay more than a couple of days. That's another big thing with transit sites. They help the people with their health issues. So my question is, out of the 31 transit sites that you were told there is, how many are dummy transit sites? A dummy transit site is Wolverhampton, is a great example of a dummy transit site. That means you can pull into Wolverhampton and the police will move you on. Wolverhampton site is a dummy site. You can't get on, even if you were dying or blind. The last family I tried to get on Wolverhampton site were a blind family, and they wouldn't allow them on it. Another thing is, if you have like a dummy site that has no water, no electricity, if you were to do that to your dog, then you'd have that SPCA in. So that's classed as a dummy site as well. So out of the 31 transit sites, how many are dummy sites and how many are really to help and support my people?
I mean, I'd say that that's a really good question, and I don't think I could answer it from this research. And basically that's because the data that I was working with was the data that came from the information, the freedom of information people at each of those councils. So essentially what we know is that this is only them telling us what the council want to tell us. Now, that doesn't necessarily, you know, certainly some of the responses that we got, and if you look at the full report, you will probably see there was an element of cluelessness from quite a number of the responses that we had. So some of those, like I briefly mentioned, councils who didn't really seem that sure, you know, they might have officially been listed, for example, in the government caravan count, which again is not necessarily 100% reliable data necessarily all the time, and was quite well. Some of the findings that we had in what we were being told by councils didn't accord with what's in the official kind of government caravan count as that's set out anyway. So the kind of lack of clarity and lack of clear information anyway about sort of what transit sites and what's available was one of the key issues that we had. So when you say about dummy sites, you know, I think that's a really clear point, and hopefully this next phase of the research might sort of shed a bit more light on kind of the more details of that.
But it would be good in your report if you can add an ending bit. I am an unauthorised encampment. I do know what's across the whole of West Midlands and the whole of Warwickshire, and I also cover Calderdale, who doesn't have a transit site.
Okay. Abby, I can see you've got your hand up. Abeline, I know you have. If I could just say, if you could save those questions now for the bigger discussion at the end, if that's okay. I'm sorry to cut across you, it seems rude, but I do want to give enough time to Mihai, and I do want to thank Zilla very much for that very thorough and helpful research. And now Mihai Beaker, the Policy and Campaigns Coordinator at Roma Support, is going to talk to us more about Roma needs. Then hopefully at the end we'll have time to capture any questions. So don't lose your questions. And if you're worried there might not be time, please put them in the chat. So thanks very much. And over to you, Mihai.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the invitation. Can I please check how much time I have?
Paul, the webinar will finish at?
We're finishing at 1:30. If
So
people want to stay on a little bit longer, then we could possibly do that.
So we were hoping that you'd speak for about 10-15 minutes, then allow time for questions, and then open. Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, so first a few words about Roma Support Group. We're a charity set up in 1998 in East London to support people from the Roma communities. We were there when we had the first wave of Roma migrants coming to the UK, settling in London, which at that time they used to be refugees from the former communist bloc, who then became EU citizens when their countries have joined the EU in 2004 and later on in 2007. And we are mainly an advice and support charity, so we've been there ever since the first day doing that, and we continue to do that a lot. In London, we see people from all across London, but also from other parts of the UK as well. Now, Roma, a few things about the community. I'm sure you are aware there are obviously differences within the different communities under the so-called Gypsy Roma and Traveller umbrella. Roma people are usually kind of people who originally lived in other parts of Europe, who migrated to the UK in the past 30 years. And so the community is very diverse. We speak about people who are originally from different countries, have different nationalities, but also people who are from different groups or tribes of Roma as well. So it's a huge diversity within the Roma community only. On top of that, Roma are also migrants in their vast majority in the UK, and have to obviously can access rights in the UK through their immigration status. Also, Roma, again, in their vast majority all across the world are settled. So they do live in houses, flats, and so on. And very, very few people across the world have kept the nomadic lifestyle. We did indeed had a nomadic lifestyle. That's how my mother grew up in a semi-nomadic way as well, but that's no longer happening. In the UK, again, vast majority of Roma are settled. There are a few, especially in London, who are sleeping rough, unfortunately, and occasionally we did came across Roma who lived on sites as well, but that was a very rare occurrence for us. Now, there is not a lot of data to look into the kind of housing accommodation kind of aspect of Roma that we can kind of reflect on, but there is some, and we've looked at it and we've analyzed that. But the kind of general sort of background is that Roma today who are in the UK tend to be in higher kind of rates of poverty comparing to the general population, tend to live in the poorer areas as well. We also know they have the background of lowest levels of education since coming from their countries of origin. They came with that package in the UK, meaning that their ability and skills to be able to fully engage with the system are reduced comparing to others. We also know that Roma are also working. Majority of Roma are actually in work, but they are working in lower paid jobs and in insecure jobs as well, which again impacts on their ability to secure safe kind of long-term accommodation. So because of that background, what we usually see is we see an overrepresentation of Roma in private rental sector. We see high levels of overcrowding. We also see very low awareness around housing rights and processes behind that. We see people facing a lot of barriers when trying to access housing services, and unfortunately a lot of discrimination in the private renting sector. And we have done a little research looking at that ourselves, mainly on Roma in London, looking at our own database, our own frontline work, and also the more recent sort of census data. But what I'm going to show you today is some of the analysis we have done from the 2021 census, which for the first time in the history included a Roma tick box for Roma people to be able to actually kind of tick and mention and confirm their ethnic identity. So we've looked a little bit at that data, and we've put together a few slides, which I'll share with you now. I hope you can see this.
Yep, we can.
Okay. All right. So ignore the name there. The slides were prepared by my colleague Ted, who's running our housing project, but he's not. He's on sabbatical now, so I'm doing this. Now, as I mentioned, Roma are in their majority in private renting sector, but there are quite high sort of discrepancies in different areas of England and Wales in terms of the levels of Roma in private renting. So the national average in England and Wales, we see around 75% of Roma who filled in the census, the 2021 census, mentioning that they are living in private renting, and in some areas that levels goes higher, as you can see in Nottingham or Sheffield, for example. And that confirms what I've just mentioned earlier on. This is the experience that we have at Roma Support Group through our frontline advice, and also the experience which is shared by Roma advisors and other people who are supporting Roma in the housing area across the UK. There will be areas where the levels are a little bit low or a little bit sort of higher, but the general kind of context is this one. Now, when we look at the different kind of groups and categories sort of Roma people, split by the main language they reported to speak during the 2021 census, we see that the highest kind of percentage of Roma in private renting are those who are originally from Slovakia, with 87% of them reporting that they live in private renting, followed by Bulgarian Roma, Romanian Roma, Portuguese, Italian, and the lowest percentage was reported by those who reported English as their main language. So again, there is a kind of a difference between the different groups of Roma, and the levels of how much they are privately renting. And again, that's confirmed through to our frontline work. We see that usually those who, for example, have a better command of English, have more skills to be able to engage and kind of work around their accommodation sort of situation. They are better at kind of accessing social housing, or they are better at having better jobs, and then better at buying their own properties and so on. So obviously language has a lot to do with this, but also, like for example, like for those from the Polish Roma community, what it also helps is the fact that they are established in the UK for a longer period, comparing to newly sort of arrivals such as Romanians and Bulgarians, and this means they have better social networks, and through that more opportunities to be able to secure kind of alternative accommodation, or buy their own properties, or rent socially, and so on. Now when we look at social renting, again, different kind of the situation is different in different regions of England. We can see that Roma usually have a lot less sort of lower levels of social renting across England and Wales, and the difference is quite big when we look at London or places like Nottingham, Luton, and so on. Now we've kind of included these examples from these regions, because that's the kind of the biggest sort of difference that we have seen there. When we look at, again, main language reported and access to social housing, you can see a breakdown here. But again, as I mentioned earlier, having English, or for example, being from the Polish Roma community, makes it more likely for people to actually be able to access social housing, and that's because it seems that this community, as well as the Czech Roma community, has more abilities, has more kind of connections with the local community, which enables them to access information and support, which then leads on to accessing social housing. Now, when we look at overcrowding situation by the different areas, again, it's a different sort of picture when we look at different regions. And again, we kind of included here the biggest levels of overcrowding and the lowest, so you can see the difference there. Obviously, Sheffield is a concerning case there. Now, again, when we look at the main language, you know, this was reflected in some ways in the first slides as well. When we see kind of those who speak Slovak as their main language, Czech, Romanian, Bulgarian tend to be in kind of more levels of being in overcrowding situation. And again, Polish, Roma, and those who speak English as their main language are less likely to be in overcrowding. Now we also have kind of Italians included here. This came as a surprise from the 2021 census to see quite a lot of Italian Roma kind of coming through the census. And I think that would kind of conclude, you know, the main bits we extracted from the 2021 census in relation to accommodation, which I wanted to touch on today. Yeah, and I would kind of invite everyone to look at the report which we've recently published, but that only looks at London, but it does reflect the context and the situation kind of nationally. And I think that includes kind of good recommendations there and information that could help. I think there is a role here that churches can play in improving the situation. And we have seen churches playing a very kind of important, helpful role, especially around supporting services and supporting, improving the situation for those who are sleeping rough, for example, especially in London. But I think that could be kind of there is a potential there for support to be facilitated in a way that Roma have more access to information around their rights, around housing, around where support is available, and so on. I think there could also be a role in facilitating for that support to happen. There are Roma people in different places who are trying to support people from their own communities, but for example, they don't have a place where they could kind of meet and provide that support. They lack connections with the local services who could come forward and help with ensuring that support is delivered there as well. And I think another role could be in kind of sort of developing the support structures at local level. We have seen kind of successful examples where a local group, Roma group, was supported initially by a charity to kind of, you know, set up to come together, which was a very important kind of factor, which that then later on led to Roma people themselves being able to organize their own support, and including around accommodation. We are such an example. You know, Roma support group was started in a church in 1998. So yeah, I think that would kind of conclude. Yeah, and so I can keep with times.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. Do we have any questions for you before we open up to general? And we will come back to the questions I know Abby and Abeline wanted from our previous speaker, Zilla. So I can see Abeline's got a hand up. Do you want to speak?
Just to ask, is there any statistics for the West Midlands, Birmingham especially? Because I used to work with British Red Cross and we used to include the Roma community, but Red Cross doesn't get the funding now to help travellers or to help with the Roma community. And it tends to be that sometimes when you go to meetings, the Roma, us, Somalis and Sudanese are not included. We're called the hard to reach communities. So every meeting I go to, I ask that they be included. But I've been doing this for years and still you tend to find that the Roma, one time I was asked to ask Roma women to leave a meeting that I was in. That was in the West Midlands and I refused and reported it obviously because it was a council meeting. And some of the times they have the organisations that are European, Eastern European organisations who are paid to help Roma people and they're not helping the Roma people. That's another thing that I think is terrible. And some of the families we have, there's multiple families sharing one house in really bad conditions in Birmingham, rat infested and things. It's really, really bad.
Well, indeed, a lot has to be done in that space. The 2021 census does provide information on, for example, a specific location such as Birmingham. So I have included in our slides a link, but if you go on the website, on the 2021 census website, all the information is publicly available there. You can extract what you want out of that. I know it's maybe it's not very.
Do not reflect.
Sorry?
You know the statistics on Roma don't reflect the true situation. Lots of the Roma people won't do these surveys and things, just like Gypsy people.
Indeed, that's why I mentioned that there is very little data available, and there is no kind of comprehensive research done in terms of Roma and housing, let's say at England level. But you know, so there is some information coming out from the census, which I think is helpful in terms of making people aware that there is a need for further work into this space. Indeed, Roma lack access to information. Indeed, Roma lack access to support. Roma are abused because of that lack of support. Many people are charging them a lot of money for that and are not providing good quality support. So I think a lot of work can be done to help develop that infrastructure for Roma to be able to actually access support and information.
Thank you, Mikhail.
Thanks.
Any other questions just on this topic? And then we'll open it up for a more general discussion about the issue of accommodation for all these communities. Okay, so if you want to come off mute, then we can have a general discussion if you would like. And there was Abby who wanted to pick up a point, I think, to Zilla.
Yeah, so my question was, like Albelin said, the dummy sites, how can we find out, is there a list of all the transit sites so we can look and go, no.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't see why not. I mean, I can't, it might be an appendix to the research, but if it isn't, I'm sure I can, you know, send across. I mean, basically that report was written out of an absolutely enormous spreadsheet, which just like all of the data in it. So, and all of the responses that I had from every single council. So that data is there. It's just kind of horrible to read and needed to be written up properly.
Okay.
Me and Albelin do a lot with councils, don't we? We love them and they're the best. Sure. You know, they really, really do. What can I say? We, Albelin's an expert, it's me. What can we be doing to our council? Because I can tell you hand on heart, mine's useless. Which is But what can we be doing to go into them? Because there's nothing. So the GTR officer for schools in Wychavon, they are now trying to make schools pay for. No, it's always been free. What are you doing? GTR History Month, we don't do anything.
Okay,
you know,
if we can stay on the topic of housing for this webinar.
I meant, what can we go to our council with this report? What can we be doing our side to try and get more councils involved in that bit? Do you know what I mean?
Mikhail, would you like to say anything that people could do that would help?
Obviously, I'm speaking on behalf of the Roma communities only. There is something that people can do. We are about to launch our first ever national campaign, which is called Mishto, which in our language, in Romanes, means good, nice, good. And the campaign has a housing element. And because of that, what we want to do is we want to go to local councils and ask them to become Mishto local councils. And there is a pledge for local councils that we're inviting them to kind of sign, which will include them committing to doing something in the housing space and also in the children's services sort of space.
That's good. Could you put something in the chat about that, please?
I can, yeah, definitely put a
so that we can share it with people. Thank you very much for that positive comment.
Just to add to that quickly, sorry, thinking
no,
about
it's fine, Silly.
What can we do? Different things we can do. One of the campaigns that FFT has on at the moment, and I didn't really have time in today's presentation to sort of talk about it in much detail, but we are campaigning for the government to repeal Part 4 of the Policing, Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, which is the act which created some of those really arguably quite draconian powers for police to move people on. I can pop the link in the chat, but we have a Right to Your MP campaign with like a sort of template, so it should, kind of makes it quite easy for people to, ask their MP to act on this. But yeah, what FFT intervened in the High Court legal challenge against the government around this aspect of the legislation, and the court did find aspects of the act to be incompatible with human rights law, and that essentially means that the government, Parliament, are meant to review it and make the legislation more in line with human rights, but that has not yet happened. We are lobbying for that to happen.
I'm proud to have the local MP who chairs the APPG. So.
Oh, have you got Mary?
I have got Mary.
Lovely
Mary Foy.
She's fab.
She is. So sorry. Anybody else want to ask questions or comments? Yeah, Abeline. Oh, David. Sorry, I'm going to ask David first, Abeline, because David.
A comment, and I think I could recognise some of the patterns that I saw within the data that Mikhail was presenting. I think there's a real danger that sometimes what happens is people believe the information that they are given that is most credible to them. And if they have limited English, their experience has not been positive, their experience is that white people have discriminated against them, then they're far more likely to take on board what somebody who arrived in the UK from Slovakia 6 months ahead of them says, rather than thinking, let's go to an expert and somebody who's going to help me negotiate my way around this system. And so one of the things that I think is a positive that we can do is actually develop some form of credibility, giving both accurate information, accurate help, but most essentially, I think, building relationships which can build trust with individual people. There's a lot of, I hate to use the term because it has all sorts of horrible connotations. There's a lot of fake news out there. And so one of the things that I think we can do is actually just talk with people and build relationships.
Thank you. Very important. We're getting messages about relationships, about trust, about language as being really important in all of this. We're also getting very positive signals about how the church can really help in this space in very many ways. Abeline, I don't see you, but you wanted to ask something. Has Abeline gone? Is Abeline still there?
Looks like she's dropped off.
Or
I'll
maybe
keep
she
an eye
was
out for her.
Maybe she was putting her hand up to say goodbye, but if she comes back, yeah, she wants to ask a question. Anybody else want to say?
Sam Worrell would like to ask a question.
Sam.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly. Yeah, it was a lot of the people that I spoke to said that they had been used to be getting water from graveyards, churchyards, but unfortunately those taps have now been cut off, so they weren't able to access water there anymore. So it's clear that the church was providing water to people, and that was very much needed, and people were really grateful for that. But people were saying they have found that that is becoming not available to them anymore. So there's definitely something around water that's just quite a simple fix. I mean, people are even saying they'd be happy to pay for water, but there's just the petrol stations are taking it away, the graveyards were taking it away, and there's just a real struggle out there for people to get a basic resource, which I found really shocking, I have to say. That was all.
No, thank you. Thank you, Sam. Some people have had to leave us. Does anybody want to comment? You can all come off mic and we can just talk if you like. No? Has everybody said all they want to say?
I think so. It's just, would you mind if we took the report, and sort of, like you say, try and get, because we do quite a bit with our council. Can we take the report and sort of say, that's why I asked about, can we see who's not replied, who has, but, can we go fast and sort of say, well, hang on, you haven't replied, why didn't you? Or you have, where is our site that you're claiming? Or we haven't got one, why haven't we got one? Is that allowed?
I mean, I don't see why not. I mean, that they sent that information under freedom of information, so it's it should be publicly available. Yeah, I mean, I think Ivy put the link to the full report in the thing, but I mean, if there's anything else that you want from it, I'll just pop my email in the chat. Hold on.
Lovely.
And just pop me an email and we can sort of take it from there. That's
perfect.
Mika has put the report in the chat as well.
Yes.
Do we get the chat after, Paul? Will people get the link?
Well, I wonder, can we click it after without losing the chat now? I'm scared to click anything yet.
We can probably send the links out. If you haven't clicked them now, we'll try and send them out to everyone who attended.
Thank you. So has everybody had chance to say, ask, comment? Who wants to?
Can I just say something?
Certainly, Andy, you can.
Yeah, I'm new to this group, and I was introduced to it by Abby, and quite recently, literally a few weeks ago. So it's a bit of a steep learning curve at the moment, but it's good to be part of it, and it's good to learn a bit more. I work quite closely with the traveller community, as Abby would tell you, and so it's good to see that there's an organisation like this in place, and so I've submitted our church as a friendly church, and hopefully going forward, all will be well.
Brilliant news. That's a really positive thing to hear, isn't it? Thank you. Anybody else?
Julie, I can see Julie wants to speak.
Yeah, I was just wondering where Andy was, whereabouts he is. Yeah,
I'm just outside Evesham in Worcestershire. The church where I'm at is at Norton and Lenchwick. It's about 3 miles outside of Evesham, so we're right on the edge of the Cotswolds, Abby's area, and I got to know Abby through funerals, basically, and a lot of the traveller community, particularly through funerals.
It's a wonderful opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I would really like to thank you both so much, Michai and and both of you, Zilla, for your presentations. They've been very thought-provoking and informative, and I think helpful, and we have a lot to take away and go forward on. And thank you everyone for being with us today and taking time to attend.